Well, I don't assume you've been disconnected.
So you're on.
Good afternoon to everyone. I apologize for the lighting. If we were in person, something I've been discussing with staff, then we wouldn't have this problem of my sitting in my office with this strange lighting effect. However, the sun will move. So I want to thank everyone who's here. I received a number of questions, and I'm going to go through the questions that we already received. If anybody has additional questions, Lindsay, how do they get them to you?
They can message us in the chat on Facebook and YouTube,
Message in the chat on Facebook or YouTube,
or send us a message on Twitter X.
or send us a message on Twitter.
Just now X. It's called X.
I know it's called X. I'm calling it Twitter.
Okay.
Who owned Twitter? Somebody other than whoever owns it now.
Correct.
All right, the first question. Can the council change the pay scale of OUC 911 dispatchers and call takers to fall under medical responders? The short answer is yes, but typically the decision about pay scales is handled as an executive function, meaning by the mayor's side of the government, and then submitted to the council for approval. I do think that there's a sentiment in the council that the OUC call takers and dispatchers are not getting paid commensurate with the duties and stress. And so that is one step the government could take to improve the working conditions. I also want to note that Council Member Pinto, as chair of the Judiciary Committee, has been holding oversight hearings frequently this fall. The issues include recruitment and retention. Second question, can you talk about Initiative 83? Will it dilute Democrats' voting power? What are the possible outcomes, good or bad? If I-83, the initiative, passes, what will be done to provide DC Board of Elections? Let me restate that. What will be done to provide the Board of Elections funding to support or administer the public's decision? So there's a lot there. First, I'm not going to speculate what happens after it's passed, if it is passed. I know the Democratic Party does not support it, and many of my colleagues do not support it. I don't support the initiative. Will it dilute Democrats' voting power? I don't know. I think a bigger concern is whether it will confuse voters and whether it will complicate the election process. It certainly will delay it. What are the outcomes, good or bad? On the good side, some people think that this will mean that candidates who are elected have broader support. Although I don't know that one could say that folks who've been elected in the past did not have broad public support. Even candidates who are controversial still had broad support, as much as some of us may have not liked that. The next question, why did you decide not to continue with passing legislation that allows the DC Council to take the mayor to court? I'm not sure I understand that question. The council has the ability to take the mayor to court when we have standing and when we disagree. And in my view, if the issue is important enough that the council believes it needs to be taken to court because it can't otherwise be resolved. That's the authority that we have. We don't need to pass legislation that allows us to do that. I'm speculating that what's behind the question is that we had threatened, I had put on the agenda back at the very beginning of this year, a resolution to authorize our general counsel to go into court against the mayor over her refusal to provide SNAP benefits as we had budgeted. But the mayor backed down, and so we didn't need to take her to court. I don't know of any other threats that have gotten that far to take the mayor to court this year or in the last couple of years. Is there a law that prohibits loitering near federal buildings? Answer, no. If so, why can't these developers rent out space to a federal partner nearby the revitalization of downtown? It sounds like what's behind this question is, well, if it's against federal law to loiter, then let's just make every building have some federal presence. But there is not, the Supreme Court has made it clear that loitering cannot be a crime. Loitering itself cannot be a crime. So that strategy won't work. Next question. If the mayor decides to provide financial relief to the residential rental property owners to provide financial relief from the Housing Production Trust Fund, Councilmember Robert White mentioned that these owners cannot have any housing code violations. If code violations exist, then no money should be given until the violations are resolved and a bona fide DC inspector has thoroughly inspected the property and signed approval or given approval. Scheduled repairs should not be allowed. What are your thoughts? I think it depends upon the degree of the violation. Every property is going to have some housing code violation, and that's not to say it's a good thing, but there are different levels of violation. With level 1, as I recall, it's level 1 being the most serious, and that would be like an emergency situation, like the lack of hot water or heat. And if the conditions are that bad, then I would agree that the city should not be providing financial assistance to the landlords without those violations being fixed. The mayor has indicated that she's going to use the Housing Production Trust Fund for the moment to help landlords with affordable housing who are on the brink of foreclosure because of increasing rent arrearages. That is a concern to me because the Housing Production Trust Fund should be used to generate more housing rather than to simply financially support existing housing. At the same time, we have a crisis right now with regard to affordable housing units that the city has already subsidized. Because of the huge increase in rent arrearages, a lot of these affordable housing providers are at risk. It's too big a financial load for them to carry these non-payment of rents. And if they do foreclose, then we lose the affordability covenants. So we need to help, but we also need to get out of this situation so that we're not using the Housing Reduction Trust Fund for purposes other than the creation of new affordable units. So to bring it back to the question, I do agree that there needs to be the right balance so that we're not subsidizing or financially supporting bad landlords who have lousy conditions in their properties. Next question, do you support the Fair Taxation of Municipal Bonds Amendment Act, which would grandfather existing municipal bond and bond fund holdings from the proposed new municipal bond tax? The short answer is no, I don't. I think it's time to move on from that issue. I would add as well that the amount of dollars that we're talking about in terms of a tax on an individual level can't be that significant. It might be in the hundreds, possibly a few $1,000s. I mean, one would have to have substantial investments in municipal bonds, like in the hundreds of thousands, maybe even more, to generate the kind of interest which in turn would result in a tax of any significant amount. And I'm sure I've probably just upset some folks. But as I said, decision was made and it's time to move on. I would note as well, most states do tax income from municipal bonds. We were an outlier. And while the Folks who think we should not have applied the tax to municipal bond interest would say, well, a couple other states transitioned in. That's exactly the fact. It was a couple of states. Next question. Will you please have a hearing on the unacceptable time for the community to receive a final order from the zoning commission? We have been waiting since March of this year. It is unfair to the community and it violates due process. I agree it's unfair to the community. I agree that it, in a sense, violates due process because everyone's entitled to speedy decisions, and not just speedy decisions, but actually the issuance of a final order, which either enables the applicant to move forward, or if there was a protest, for the opposition to be able to go to court. The delays serve no constructive purpose. Recently, I put a lot of pressure on the zoning commission to get out an order that had been taking not since May or March, but since I think it was 2019. More importantly, we put money in the budget on a one-time basis for the Office of Zoning to increase its staff to get rid of the backlog and to get current with its issuing its orders, because it is important. So I do find it unacceptable. It's been the subject of several hearings that we've had, oversight hearings of the Office of Zoning. Next question. I would appreciate if you could provide an update on the legislation regarding renaming the Triangle Park at North Dakota Avenue, 2nd Street Northwest, and Quackenboss Street to rename it the Ron Austin Memorial Park. Specifically, any details you can share about the timeline for votes and when this bill might be signed into law. That would be very helpful. Well, in fact, the council has passed that legislation. It did take a while, but we passed it, and it's right now pending before the mayor for signature, and I think she has until August 29th to sign it.
October.
If I said August, I meant October. October 29th, so that would be next week. I expect she will sign it. Next question. Can you break down the impact of the new proposal for the Capital One Center with Monumental Sports? How fast will this move through the council? And I may interrupt because I'm about to sneeze, or maybe not. If folks will remember that at the end of March, the mayor and Monumental Sports, with council members present, announced that that Monumental was going to stay in the district after all, and there was a term sheet at the time that was executed. Now, term sheet lists the terms to which the parties agree. It's not a contract, but it lays the framework for a contract. In the subsequent months, which, help me here, April, May, June, July, August, September. In the subsequent 6.5 months, there have been negotiations to work out a new lease, a development and financing agreement, and some ancillary agreements. And all that got submitted to the council. Well, maybe not all of it, because there's some ancillary agreements that don't require council approval, but all that got finished last week, and legislation was submitted to the council on Friday. The deal that was agreed to, it was funded in the budget of $515 million. That has not changed. The most significant change between what was announced back in March and what was submitted to the council last week is that of the $515 million, a portion is going to be used to purchase the building, the arena, so that the city will own it. Importantly, the lease makes clear that the city is not responsible for the operations and maintenance of the building. That's entirely Monumental Sports' responsibility. So from a practical point of view, or from a day-to-day point of view, or from what we all see point of view, nothing is changing. But the city will have title to the building, which actually is a good deal for the city, I think. And Also, it makes it easier for the city to provide the $515 million that was agreed to. Again, there's no additional money coming from the city to monumental sports. It's still within the 515 million, which if I remember correctly, was 500 million for the arena and 15 million for the public space. But it's all one big project. The next question, with the escalating impact of climate change, it is difficult to accept our own National Park Service will plan so much environmental damage, removing whole sections of Rock Creek Forest, including mature and legacy trees, in order to rehab expansion of Rock Creek Golf Course. Can you stop this harm to the DC environment? Well, the short answer is yes, I could try to stop the harm. I don't think, though, that the council, for all practical purposes, would be successful in trying to stop it. It's not actually before the council. It has gone through other approvals. Now, in full disclosure, I have a seat on the National Capital Planning Commission, and NCPC was the last, or at least the latest approval, but that vote was unanimous. What do I want to say? There was a full 18-hole golf course at Rock Creek Park. This is up north of Military Road. And over the past century, it has fallen into disrepair and has been encroached on by trees and by the forest. And so there are portions of that 18-hole golf course that were usable that no longer are usable because of the incursion of trees. There was a lot of back and forth and a lot of analysis. And in fact, the proposal before NCPC was revised to reduce the number of trees that will be cut down. And while it sounds like a very large number, it's in discrete areas. And my understanding is that the number, which is over 1,000, is an up to, not less than number of trees that will get cut down. And some of those trees may not be healthy. All this, as I understand it, will be identified on an individual tree by tree basis, so that the final number will probably be less than what was authorized. The thinking is that there was a golf course there and that this is restoring that use, although it won't be exactly an 18-hole course as I understand it, but it will have, among other things, a better clubhouse and a driving range. So I get it that there are some folks who are very oppositional to it. But it has gone through all the approvals, at the most recent being NCPC, National Capital Planning Commission, on a unanimous vote. Next question. MPD has deemed 3003 Van Ness Street Northwest a nuisance building, and crime both in and around the building has risen dramatically. In addition, the building has a significant vermin infestation and numerous structural problems that Equity Apartments Management Company is not addressing. What can you do to address this serious problem for the tenants and neighbors of this area? Well, the question is, well, I guess it'd be neighbors of the building, but the tenants of the building. It's difficult for the council to do anything specifically with a specific property. It's important that the tenants are organized. I'm kind of guessing that there is a tenant association. They can consult with the Office of the Tenant Advocate, a position that the council created about a decade ago to help with tenants. The tenant association could also go to the Attorney General, who sometimes brings suit against landlords. Tends to bring suit when the situation is especially egregious. I would recommend those two courses: Tenant Advocate, Office of the Tenant Advocate, and the Attorney General for the district. Next question. Why is DC allowing the noise terrorism every day at 2301 S Street Northwest, which is destroying That is, the noise terrorism is destroying my peaceful enjoyment of my home. My tranquility is guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution. Well, actually, I'm not sure that tranquility is guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution, which is maybe beside the point. By all accounts, the noise, which is, I think, megaphones that are set up and sometimes speakers that are set up with the owners or the possessors of the megaphones or the speakers, then sort of leaving the area or at least not being close to the speakers. So that the thinking is that this is going to make a point with the ambassador of mainland China. I'm not sure that's working. It's definitely, though, ruining the peace and tranquility of the neighborhood. I've been turning this over in my head, what we could do. Not clear to me. I know that Councilmember Pinto is considering legislation that might help. But this has been a bit of a struggle for all of us to figure out how we can be helpful because the noise is out of what I want to say, the noise is just inappropriate. However, the disturbing the peace statute does not specifically address noise. And our noise ordinance is so convoluted that it is not helpful. And if it sounds like, well, why don't we just fix those? That's not simple either because we have a long tradition of respecting First Amendment demonstrations, which could be a union picket line, which often is noisy, or it could be a march down Pennsylvania Avenue with gun control advocates, which can be very noisy. There are many different kinds of First Amendment type demonstrations where noise may even be intentional, and we don't want to catch them up in a net that tries to get at some folks who are destroying the peace and quiet of a neighborhood. There's not an easy answer here. There's a bill that I introduced with several council members that's in Brianne Nadeau's committee. I'm expecting that bill will get marked up this fall. And there's a companion bill that Councilmember Nadeau introduced that's in the committee of the whole, and I will mark that up this fall. And that will help a little bit. Next question, will you consider other means to make Chancellor Farabee downsize his administration regardless of mayoral control? So what we've been doing is we passed a law, the council passed a law in December of 2022 that's called Schools First in Budgeting that requires that schools are held harmless. Maybe I should put this differently. That schools will get the same budget plus a inflationary factor from one year to the next, unless their enrollment has decreased so much that it actually eliminates a teacher, or has increased so much that it actually requires an additional teacher. So the law is about financial stability. The mayor and the chancellor have deliberately, intentionally, overtly, outspokenly ignored the law, which has been a problem. The council in each of the last two budgets, meaning the one for the current year as well as the one for the year just passed, restored the funding that was to which the individual schools were entitled. And we did so at the expense of central administration. I do not know if the mayor and chancellor are going to try this stunt again next year. I feel very strongly that if we want our schools to succeed, we can't be making them fight for scarce resources. They ought to be able to plan from one year to the next to the following year with a sense of stability in their finances. And even if their enrollment drops, how do we expect to turn around that school and go back to increasing its enrollment if we are cutting its resources? So for many reasons, schools should not be cut. And the way that the council has solved these budget proposals from the mayor is to downsize the chancellor's administration. Next question, can you create an education subcommittee or remove it from the committee of the whole? Um, well, I've heard suggestions like this in the past. 2 years ago, in spite of those suggestions, the council unanimously supported continuing education in the committee of the whole. We actually have more full-time staff devoted solely to education than ever was the case when there was an independent education committee. We've actually had more oversight hearings on education agencies than any previous education committee. And I think that we've made some significant changes, such as the schools first in budgeting legislation and we passed earlier this year a School Improvement Act, which creates authority in OSSE, the Office of State Superintendent for Education, to work with the lowest performing schools and provide additional guidance, support, and resources so that we actually have a strategy going forward to improve the lowest performing schools. We have been focused on key areas that will improve education, like reducing truancy and absenteeism, reducing turnover of teachers and principals. And as I said, financial stability. We have a hearing, I think it's tomorrow. No, Wednesday on DCPS's budget. Not what's proposed, that's too far off, but how they could be more efficient with the resources they have. Again, with an eye toward reducing central administration and increasing funding in our schools. Education has been in the committee of the whole almost continuously since 2006. And when I created a separate education committee for 6 years in the last decade, I have to say I was very disappointed with the progress. Next question, Whittier is scheduled for modernization next year. Unfortunately, in order to accommodate the community's needs to build a cottage school to use during the renovation, I think cottage school means trailers. The modernization was delayed again. My question is simple. If everyone in DC government acknowledges that Whittier needs to be modernized, and we know that endless taxpayer dollars are being thrown away on unfixable issues, then how can we make a change to the modernization schedule and give our kids the school they need? So I checked with my staff. It was known at the time that we put money in the budget for trailers at swing space, that would probably delay the modernization. Parents were quite clear that they didn't want to have to swing to Sharp. Excuse me, and so trailers were the solution, but it came with a delay. The good news is that the modernization is on track. That is, with the swing space, they'll be able to move forward. Those are all the questions I got before the meeting. Lindsay, say again how people can get their questions in.
They can type their questions in the chats on Facebook or YouTube.
Type your questions in the chats on Facebook or YouTube.
They can direct message us on X or Twitter.
Direct message us on Twitter.
And they can email chairmancs@dccouncil.gov.
Or email chairmancs@dccouncil.gov.
We have quite a few questions that have come in via email and in the chat, so.
Before you go there, I have a note here. ANCs, I have quarterly meeting with ANCs. And the next quarterly meeting is October 30th, and we'll be getting word out about that. And then the quarterly meeting after that is tentatively scheduled for January 29th. And that will be a lot of new commissioners. And I'll mention this again. Lindsay.
Okay, I think the questioner may have missed your answer, so to prevent it from happening again, why don't you support Initiative 80?
I think that ranked choice voting will complicate and delay the election process. And I think it's in search for a better elected officials, which misses that in our democracy, what legislatures are about is ordinary people being elected to represent and to bring different perspectives. That's why diversity is important. And ranked choice voting is, I think, a pursuit of a perfection that is unattainable. The other part of the ballot of the initiative is to eliminate the primaries. I mean, there still would be primaries, but they would no longer be a Democratic Party and a Republican primary and a Green Party primary. It would be a Democratic Party that's open to any registered voter. And what I've seen in other states is that gets manipulated, sometimes to support your candidate and sometimes to thwart your candidate. So I don't think these are improvements. I think that there are folks out there who think that somehow there's a better way to elect people. And having been participated personally in the electoral process for decades, there are different ways to elect people, but not a better way to elect people. Sort of like what Winston Churchill said, that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the others.
Okay, I got this in an email. Why has the DC Council and Mayor Bowser not met sooner to discuss preparedness specifics merely 2 weeks before actual elections take place? Councilmember Allen has met regularly with Capitol Police, but why hasn't this DC preparedness plan been initiated months ago? We are merely 16 days away from the presidential election and another possible insurrection.
Well, we're not 16 days away from an insurrection. I'm hopeful there won't be an insurrection. And in fact, even though some folks have talked about it, but it seems to me that the circumstances in 2021 were very different than today. If Donald Trump is unsuccessful, and I hope he is, he's not an incumbent who can do the things that he did in 2021. He's an outsider. The incumbent is Joe Biden, and I don't think he's going to fail to call out the National Guard, nor do I think he's going to have a rally that he's going to have marchers go up to the Capitol. Now, I'm just saying that, not that that means we can all sit back and be comfortable, but it is important to note that it may be 16 days from the election. It's not 16 days from January. So there is time, but also there's been a lot of work that's been going on behind the scenes. What's happening tomorrow is that the mayor and the council are meeting, and the full council, or all the members who are able to attend, will be briefed and be able to discuss what planning has already taken place. Tomorrow is not the first step. In fact, I participated in a meeting with the mayor back in the summer, and I know that that's not the only meeting that's been going on within the executive branch on how to ensure public safety during the next few months.
Okay, we had a couple of A and C questions. So I'm gonna try to combine them. The Office of the ANC has no regulatory or enforcement authority. However, they are the only government entity that provides an oversight of commissions. It seems like ANCs can do whatever they want because they are elected officials. What other ways can these commissions be accountable to the public? And along with that,
No, let's stop
Okay.
with that for a minute.
all right,
So in what other ways can ANCs be accountable to the public? You know, I had a conversation with somebody on Saturday who said the ANCs need to be reformed, and I kind of got a bit animated there. ANCs are elected. And the value to that is that rather than relying on ad hoc, totally volunteer citizen groups, which may or may not exist, there actually is a formal process to elect neighborhood representatives who collectively promote the quality or protect the quality of life in their neighborhood. Some ANCs are better than others, and that's the nature of elections, is that some people who are elected are better than other people, or some people who are elected are horrible. There is not a way to provide better accountability than what we have, which is an independent auditor of the District of Columbia who does audit every ANC, There's the Inspector General who could step in on a particular issue, although generally the Inspector General defers to the auditor. There is council oversight. Robert White has jurisdiction over the ANCs, and at least twice a year there's a hearing where there is discussion about ANCs, the good and the bad, and what could be different. The Office of the ANCs is another mechanism, not so much for accountability as in being able to discipline or enforce something with the ANCs, but to try to help ensure order and efficiency, if you will, with the ANCs. Ultimately, just like with the council, the accountability is with the voter. Don't like somebody, you got 2 years to throw them out. It is possible to do a recall, although the timelines are very short because it's a 2-year term. What's the rest of the question, Lindsay?
Open government has been failing with ANCs operating with little public input and with little transparency. What are your feelings about that?
That the BEGA and the Office of Open Government continue to press. And the Office of ANCs, again, while it doesn't have regulatory authority, can remind commissions and tell commissioners about what their responsibilities are with regard to being open. I mean, I've just seen this over the years. Some ANCs it's disappointing that they are so bad about either being accessible to their own members or being accessible to the public. And it's unfortunate, but I don't know of another way to take essentially a legislative body, that is people who are elected by the voters, and impose some sort of regulatory discipline, like throwing them off. Well, we're actually going through that with the council right now, and it is a time-consuming process, because ultimately those who are elected are responsible to the voters.
A follow-up on Whittier. The money hasn't been enough for Whittier. DGS isn't able to fix things or refuses to do so. We are lacking basic systems and the school is embarrassing. We accepted the delay with the understanding that DGS could maintain a safe space. They have not been able to.
All right, so I don't know if you could hear the question, but going back to Whittier and the DGS is not keeping up the building, that would not surprise me. And again, that's not to defend, because I think that DGS needs to do a much, much, much better job with taking care of our school facilities. And I think much of the problem they have is management disorder, that they're really not managing their workload for schools responsibly. When they have to do repeat work orders, when they will treat multiple work orders from the same building for a similar problem, let's say door locks, that they treat them on a sequential basis rather than one locksmith coming out and fixing all the work orders at once, no matter how recent or old the work orders are. That's just inefficient. And when they have to come back to fix the problem because they didn't do it right, these are all reasons why DGS is behind. It's inexcusable. I've got to tell you that Councilmember Lewis George, who has oversight over DGS, has pressed really, really hard on DGS to do better.
Chairman Mendelson, you recently held a hearing on public space and noise, including touching on nightlight contributions. Are you aware that the Noise Task Force instituted circa 2014 has been placed on pause or discontinued? Several years ago, when DCRA was split into DOB and DLCP, regulators have paused the important work of the NTF, and now residential neighborhoods are being greatly impacted by nightclub noise that is not being investigated. Can you assist with the reactivation of the NTF?
The person who asked the question should follow up with my office, and the staff person is Blaine Stum, who's working on the noise ordinance. There are 2 bills pending in the council. One is in the committee of the whole, harmonious living, which deals basically with the building code to try to minimize the unpleasantness of loud noise inside residences. That has its advantages. It doesn't really solve the problem, though, of the loudness of the noise. That's the other bill that's pending, which is in Councilmember Nadeau's committee. And that creates a new way of, a new metric for measuring noise. And so if I remember correctly, the bill measures, has a decibel limit, measures at source. And that is a much better approach than what's the current law, which is that you have to measure the decibels from inside a residential unit. A process that's so cumbersome that no violator will ever be caught. So the council's taking some steps, but I would be willing to explore the noise task force, and the person who wrote the question should contact Blaine.
I live in Maine. Is there a way for me to advocate for you to become a state, or does it have to be only residents?
Now, I got that question by email and I wrote back to the person.
Oh, did you? Oh,
I did.
they
And
were
I
just,
said, reach out to your senators and your congressmen. Because in order for statehood legislation to pass Congress, the Senate and the House have to approve it. And our challenge is that folks in other states, they don't care about statehood the way we do. And so there's just not a whole lot of caring there. So this person who lives in Maine, reach out to your senators and congressmen. If you don't know who your senators and congressmen are, Google it.
What services are available for at-risk children?
What services are available for at-risk children? A lot of services. That's not to say that they're administered well. DHS has numerous programs, and through the DC Public Schools, we have additional funding to schools if there are at-risk kids there. Part of the answer to the question, no. The answer to the question depends, no. A better answer to the question depends on what the needs are of the individual at-risk child. So if the at-risk child is struggling because at-risk correlates with poverty, the at-risk child is struggling with basic nutrition, well, we have food stamps, they're no longer called food stamps, SNAP. And we have other programs such as fresh produce in certain low-income neighborhoods. At-risk is often a school-related term, and there we have additional dollars to schools with high numbers of at-risk students. So there are a lot of programs, a lot of different ways that we try to deal with it, and I think that's the best answer I can give without something more specific.
Okay, one more question back to the ANCs. There needs to be an entity that can investigate ANC's conduct, and since they are elected officials, the results of investigation should be released publicly so the community can be informed of the actions taken by the ANCs that may or may not align with the law. Public can't know about things that aren't investigated and made public by some sort of entity.
I'm not sure how to answer that, but I hope there's some more questions coming in because we still have some time.
Yes.
Oh, you said that was the last
No,
one.
that was the one that I got another follow-up about ANCs.
Now I've forgotten the question. The
Outside entity.
So, investigations don't happen quickly. The investigation that the council started with regard to Councilmember White, we started in September. That's when the law firm was selected, and there's going to be a lot of effort to try to get their recommendations and a report by early December. So what is that? That's 2.5 months, 3 months. Investigations are not quick. And sometimes a constituent's complaint with an ANC is more about a decision or policy than it is about some action that is clearly outside the law. For instance, an ANC needs to ensure that all the commissioners have a key to the office if the ANC has an office. I've seen instances where a commissioner won't do that. And then that's a matter of going to the auditor or the inspector general or the office of ANCs or Councilmember Robert White, who chairs the oversight committee. But that's a lot different than this commission. They don't listen to the community. They don't listen to me. They don't listen to reason. And that could just be a policy difference. And it might be the community's got the right position on this and not the ANC, but that's a little different than the first example.
Speaking of investigation, where is the money for the ad hoc committee the law firm investigating Councilmember White coming from? Does it really need to cost $400,000? And why can't the council investigate its own members for violation of code of conduct / ethics? They're not doing any criminal investigation.
Well, to answer the last part, it's very difficult for the council to investigate its own member. First of all, we don't have the kind of investigatory staff that we are getting from hiring a law firm that specializes in investigations. And this approach is not unusual to contract with a law firm to undertake an investigation when there's a controversy, to put it nicely, or a scandal involving a member, or in the case of the corporate world, a high-ranking corporate officer. The cost of the contract is up to $400,000. I wouldn't be surprised if we get there, in which case that's the cap. But it could be less depending upon how much work is done by the law firm. I do agree with the sentiment that we're probably not going to get a whole lot more information about the criminal allegations because the U.S. attorney is not going to share and the defendant is not going to share. But nonetheless, the ad hoc committee or the chair of the ad hoc committee felt that the best course was to bring in outside counsel to investigate. As far as where the money's coming from, the secretary to the council is scrimping and saving from, maybe I shouldn't say scrimping and saving, is scraping from different lines in the council's budget to come up with the 400,000. I do not know if she used any of last year's leftover money from council members from the council. That I don't know, but that's where the money's coming from, is within the council's budget.
I live across the street from a row of boarded up houses, and it's been that way for years. What kind of laws has the council implemented or is implementing to improve these issues?
Well, first of all, the council doesn't implement any laws. We adopt laws, which is similar to our adopting policy. And so we adopt policy and then it's up to the executive to implement it. A couple of years ago, I did rather vigorous and public oversight of vacant property and identified over and over properties that were obviously vacant, derelict, blighted, and were not being classified as such. When a property is classified as vacant or blighted, it then has a different tax class and a different tax rate. So homeowners pay 85 cents per $100 valuation. Vacant property, it's $5 per $100 valuation. Blighted property, it's $10 per $100 valuation. I just introduced last week a new bill called Vacant to Vibrant, and we're having a hearing, I believe, on November 15th on the legislation. You can go to the council's website. I believe it's Bill 25-1003. You can go to the council's website, the hearing management system, HMS, and sign up to testify. If we have a lot of witnesses, testimony will be limited to 3 minutes. We're not going to mark up the bill this fall. I'm hoping to reintroduce it, and I'm planning on reintroducing it in January, and then we'll be able to proceed to markup. The hearing will be helpful because it will be an opportunity for a lot of public feedback. The bill is lengthy, it's about 60 pages, and it deals with different aspects of vacancy, including, just to give you an example, tangled title, which is somebody dies and the property's tied up in probate, maybe because there isn't a will. And so the title's all messed up and the property remains vacant while the title's messed up. The bill deals with a circumstance like that. The bill also recognizes there's a difference between property that's been vacant for a couple months and a property that's been vacant for a couple of years, and tries to treat them differently. The problem is, as the questioner said, living across from a row of vacant homes, has got to be a blight on the neighborhood. No activity. It could, depending upon circumstances, it could attract vagrants or squatters, and some, what I say, public safety issues. And the city's got to get better about dealing with that. Next question.
The deck over in DuPont Circle, as you may know, is moving forward. It is a very large expense at a time when DC has much larger issues, financial issues. The deck is the equivalent to Alaska's bridge to nowhere. My question for you is, even though the project has been funded, is there anything you or the council can do to redirect the money to something that provides services to the community at large rather than a deck over, which will just be a big cement field?
Well, clearly the person who wrote the question thinks that this was a bad policy choice. But I can tell you there are a lot of people who think it was a very good policy choice. My last conversation, which was only like a month ago, with the bid for the DuPont Circle area, is looking forward to the deck over, which they intend to activate. So instead of having this space that separates the two sides of Connecticut, there actually would be more activation. So I don't think it's a bridge to nowhere. Technically, yes, or theoretically, yes, the council could redirect the money, although I think construction is going to start this fall, and it would be too late at that point. I will also note that this is in the capital budget, and that's not the same as in the operating budget. So if the person who wrote the question thinks that there are priorities such as affordable housing, which clearly is a priority, we couldn't simply take the money that's in the capital budget and move it over to affordable housing subsidies, because the capital dollars don't work that way.
This is not so much a question, but a statement. Please report Sam Ford and others to the DC Archives Advisory Group.
Thank you, Bill Rice.
What is the council doing about truancy problem in our public schools and charter schools?
Well, we're having a hearing in November. I don't remember the date. Maybe Lindsay will find it for me, on truancy and chronic absenteeism. We've been having these hearings at least once a year. This will actually be the third hearing this year. Keep the pressure on the executive to do more. I have to say that I am disappointed. There are some schools that are doing an excellent job reaching out to families, working with families to get kids into school. But there are a number of schools that are not doing that. And I don't feel that the administration is as committed to reducing truancy as they need to be, so that they're ensuring that the resources are there, more than resources, the strategies, because we know what it is, which is hands-on working with kids and their families when kids are not showing up at school, particularly in the younger grades, where it's everything about the family and their circumstances, and unlike high school, nothing with the kid. Kids want to go to school because that's where their friends are. And if the school is exciting and nurturing, then they'll want to be at school for that reason as well. And I realize that can be an issue. So typically for the younger kids, they're missing school because there's some issue, stress in the household, in the home. And we just know there's strategies and there are resources to work with the families to get the kids into school. If we don't get the kids into school, I'm thinking of particularly the younger kids, then they're never going to catch up with what they're missing. And that's just tragic. Lindsay?
Um, I have one more ANC follow-up if you are okay with that.
Is this the last question? Not that I'm trying to end it, but
This is the last question. Yes. Okay. Would you support an entity of ANC commissioners being created? So one commissioner from each commission that could review complaints by other commissioners or members of the public who could investigate and report to the public so they may be better informed when making decisions on who to vote for during the election.
it's an interesting idea. It sounds like a sort of a council of commissioners that would do some oversight. I will note that there are now well over 40 commissions. And so that would be a very large council. And that in itself creates a challenge. But it's an interesting idea, and I think it warrants some further exploration. Any other questions? You all have been a good group, an exciting group. Nobody's talked back. Actually, I have no idea because you could be talking back and I wouldn't hear you. I really hate these virtuals because all I do is talk for an hour as opposed to in person when there's much more dialogue, and I think it's better. But on the other hand, there's usually more participation when it's virtual, and we did cover a lot of questions, a lot more than I would if it was in person. So I want to thank you all. The next meetup, well, we usually don't announce the date this early, but there'll be one in person in November. That means I'll be somewhere in one of the wards, usually at a coffee shop, and you all come. And until then, I'm going to sign off. If you're a commissioner, again, we have a quarterly meeting on October 30th. And the one after that will be January 29th. Thank you all. Have a good evening. I'm glad the sun is setting not because I think like it when the sun sets, but at least